Now this is going to be a unique video because it's all photographs. I was not actually able to shoot video that day, but I'm going to show you how to install a pivot door. Here is the empty doorway. Here is the pivot door I installed, unfinished, and here it is when it was painted. Now a pivot door does not have wall-mounted hinges. It has this bottom-mounted pivot, which is also called a floor hinge, and you'll notice it mounts to the jamb and the floor, and it's cut into the door. And then there's a plate mounted on the top of the door with a hole in it. And then there's a corresponding pin that is mounted on the top of the jamb, and that pin inserts into that hole in the top of the door. That allows the door to pivot back and forth. And the spring in the floor hinge pulls the door back into its closed location. Thus, it's called a pivot door. It pivots either way. And now I'm going to show you how to install it. Here's a look at the lower portion of the old door. Notice how it's cracked and falling apart. Here's what happens. These floor hinges get so old that eventually they seize up or they break, and therefore they don't pivot anymore, and it starts torquing the door and the door cracks or breaks. So that's why we had to replace it. The first step is to install the floor bracket. The spring hinge is going to mount onto this bracket with machine screws. So this bracket goes right up against the jamb and it goes in the center of the jamb. So there's really no measuring involved. Now here's a close-up shot of the spring hinge mounted on the bottom of the door. You notice the actual pivot part, as shown by this black arrow, is going to be about 3 inches from the wall once it's installed. And therefore the top pin needs to be the same distance from the wall, whatever it is, and that's explained in the instructions. The point is that they need to line up. Now the first thing we have to do is cut the door to length. So here's what I would recommend. Place the hinge on the floor and even put in 1 screw if you want. And see where that arrow is at the bottom of the hardware? Put your tape measure right there where the arrow is on the bottom of that spring and run it up to the top of the jamb. Whatever that distance is, subtract 1/4 inch, and that will be the length of your door. And whatever the width of your opening is, subtract 3/8 of an inch, and that will be the width of your door. Now the pivot side of the door needs to have the edges rounded off. So notice how I drew that circular pattern on the bottom of the door. And then what you'll do is just start planing the door on each edge and just round it off with each pass. It sounds a lot harder than it is. It's actually pretty easy. You can finish it up with some sandpaper, and you can even use a belt sander to do this. Next, you have to drill the hole and then cut the mortise to receive the plate on the top of the door. Just follow the instructions and you can trace the metal plate. It's pretty easy, and it doesn't have to look great because no one's going to see this. Next, you have to cut the bottom of the door to receive the floor hinge. The template they give you along with the measurements is very easy to follow. Usually I just hold it up against the bottom of the door and trace it, and notice you have to do a little mortise on the side of the door and on the bottom to receive the parts where the hinge screws into the door. And you will need a jigsaw to make these cuts. When you're ready to install the door, hold it in the open position like this, and then angle the door so you can put the top plate up into the top pin. Then move the door back onto the floor mounting plate, then hold the bottom of the door and carefully close it. Once it's in the closed positions, then screw the floor hinge into the floor plate. Then you can screw on the decorative covers that come with these, and trust me when I say these things never go on well. they always seem to be problematic, so good luck. And lastly, you want to get some sort of push plate for each side of the door. Otherwise, the doors get all dirty and junky. So those are all the steps needed to install a pivot door. They aren't that hard and they can be a fun challenge.